Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about Men in the Sun and Other Palestinian Stories by Ghassan Kanafani. Now, remember in this series, I've been trying to look at Palestinian voices and hear from them, people who've experienced this violence directly. And a couple episodes back, we looked at Gaza Writes Back, which we heard from young people who lived through Operation Cast Lead in 2008 and 2009. In I Saw Ramallah, we heard from Marid al-Barghouti, who was university age during the 1967 war. And in Ghassan Kanafani, not necessarily in Men in the Sun, but in him, we're talking about someone who was 10 years old at the time of the Nakba. He was born in 1936 in Acre, also known as Akka, into a Kurdish family. So being 10 years old at the time of the Nakba means that what he's writing about is not just the experience of childhood, but his lived experience of his adulthood. His plays and novels and short stories have been translated into 16 languages. He was also the editor of a weekly Al-Hadath. And at the time of his assassination by Mossad in 1972 in Beirut, along with his teenage niece, he was a spokesman for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. So while he may have a reputation in the greater world, potentially as a political activist, he's well remembered among those who appreciate Palestinian literature as potentially one of Palestine's greatest writers. And that's how I found out about him. He just kept getting referenced by people over and over that I respect immensely. People like Edward Said and just recently Marid al-Barghouti, as I said, I just talked about that in the last video. And when you hear a name referenced over and over and over, you just have to seek it out. And I'm so glad I did. His writing is absolutely magnificent, and I was not disappointed. Now, I can't speak too much about Men in the Sun. As you can see, this is not a very long volume, and Men in the Sun is a novella rather than a novel. So I can't speak about it too much without spoiling the ending. And it's too short of a work for you not to go and read it yourself. So let me just speak broadly about some themes. The first is intergenerational despair that we see flowing from the Nakba. So our protagonists, our main characters, come from different walks of life, but also different age groups. So we have an older man who's been in despair for a while, not quite accepting the situation. No, he has to go to another country, potentially Kuwait in this case, to earn some money to support his family. You also have a teenager who knows that his older brother was sending money from Kuwait, but then he's gotten married and he stopped sending money, but he sent a letter to the younger brother, say, hey, you got to go take care of the family now. And seeing the trauma play out across different generations. So that's one aspect of this. The second is the smuggling that they're doing is to Arab countries. So remember the narrative that these other Arab countries are trying to claim that they're the great protector of the Palestinians. And yet this story points the finger at these other Arab countries that did not treat the Palestinians well, did not welcome them with open arms, led to exploitation, not only exploitation from other Arabs, but sometimes from other Palestinians. And that's hard to see. It's hard to see. We also see this beautiful narrative technique that Kanafani uses to take us forwards and backwards in time for each of the characters, which gives us greater context to make these characters fully fleshed out, even though we've only gotten to know them for a very brief amount of time and the story is not long. But because we've had a chance to know them through these flashbacks, we feel the ending that much more. And I don't want to say too much more about the ending. You've got to read it yourself. So let me just read a little bit from the novel, this isn't a spoiler. He turned on his heel and went out through the door. His nose was assailed by the smell of dates and big straw baskets. What should he do now? He had no wish to ask himself the question, yet he didn't know why he felt some sort of relief. What could be the reason for it? He wanted to distract himself by searching for the reason. Part of his mind was taken up with feelings of happiness and relief, but they couldn't sidetrack him from all the sorrows that had filled his heart in the last half hour. When all his efforts failed, he leaned against the wall. Crowds of people walked past without paying him any attention. Perhaps it was the first time in his life that he had found himself alone and a stranger in a throng of people like this. He wanted to know the reason for that remote sensation that gave him contentment and rest, a sensation like the one he used to have when he had finished watching a film and felt that life was grand and vast, and that in the future he would be one of those men who spend every hour and day of their lives in exciting fulfillment and variety. But what was the reason for his having such a feeling now, when he had not seen a film like that for a long time, and only a few minutes before the threads of hope that had woven fine dreams in his heart had been broken in the fat man's shop? I mean, just listen to that. Not only a few minutes before the threads of hope that had woven fine dreams in his heart had been broken in the fat man's shop. And who the fat man is and why he was in his shop, I'm going to leave that to you for you to find out when you read this story. As I say, there's other short stories in here, so I just picked from two of them, not because they were necessarily the two best ones, but I just wanted to give you some representation. The first one that I'm picking is a very short story called The Land of Sad Oranges, and this is about the expulsion of a family in 1948 from Jaffa, you can also pronounce it that way, and this is going to be a long excerpt, but I promise you it'll be worth it. It's not a spoiler, but it's the very first part of the short story, so it will set you up and hopefully give you maybe a taste of the orange so that you keep reading it yourself, all right? When we set out from Jaffa for Accra, there was nothing tragic about our departure. We were just like anybody who goes to spend the festival season every year in another city. Our time in Acre passed as usual, with nothing untoward. I was young then, and so I probably enjoyed those days because they kept me from going to school. But whatever the fact of the matter, the picture gradually became clearer on the night of the great attack on Acre. That night passed, cruel and bitter, amidst the despondency of the men and the prayers of the women. You and I and the others of our age were too young to understand what the story meant from beginning to end, but that night the threads began to grow clearer. In the morning, when the Jews withdrew, threatening and fuming, a big lorry was standing at the door of our house. A simple collection of bedding was being thrown into it, from here and there, quickly and feverishly. I was standing leaning against the ancient wall of the house when I saw your mother climb into the lorry, followed by your aunt and the children. Your father started tossing you and your brothers and sisters into the lorry and on top of the belongings, and then he seized me from my corner and lifted me over his head into the iron rack on the roof of the driver's cab, where I found my brother Riyadh sitting quietly. The lorry was already moving off before I had settled myself into a comfortable position. Beloved Acre was already disappearing behind the bends in the road going up to Ras Nakra. It was rather cloudy, and a chilly feeling invaded my body. Riyadh was sitting quite quietly, with his legs hanging over the edge of the rack, leaning his back against the luggage as he stared into the sky. I sat silently, with my chin between my knees and my arms wrapped around them. The groves of orange trees followed each other in succession along the side of the road. We were all eaten up with fear. The lorry panted over the damp earth, and the sound of distant shots rang out like a farewell. When Ras Nakra came into sight in the distance, cloudy on the blue horizon, the lorry stopped. The women climbed down over the luggage and made for a peasant sitting cross-legged with a basket of oranges just in front of him. They picked up the oranges, and the sound of their weeping reached our ears. I thought then that oranges were something dear, and these big, clean fruits were beloved objects in our eyes. When the women had bought some oranges, they brought them over to the lorry, and your father climbed down from the driver's side and stretched out his hand to take one. He began to gaze at it in silence and then burst into tears like a despairing child. In Ras Nakra, our lorry stopped beside many others. The men began handing their weapons to the policemen stationed there for the purpose, and as our turn came, and I saw the rifles and machine guns lying on the table and looked towards the long line of lorries entering Lebanon, rounding the bends in the roads and putting more and more distance between themselves and the land of the oranges, I too burst into a storm of weeping. Your mother was still looking silently at the orange, and all the orange trees that your father had abandoned to the Jews shone in his eyes. All the well-tended orange trees that he had bought one by one were printed on his face, and reflected in the tears that he could not control in front of the officer at the police post. In the afternoon, when we reached Sidon, we had become refugees. The last excerpt is called Letter from Gaza, and it's between two childhood friends. Well, not between two childhood, it's from one childhood friend to another, and they probably both had a plan to escape from Palestine and either send their family money or just say, you know what, it's not our concern anymore. We've got to build a life for ourselves. And that is a valid narrative. That's a valid set of questions, difficult things to grapple with that all Palestinians have had to deal with in the diaspora. And I don't think there's a right answer, but obviously Kanafani has a position on this, and it comes through in the letter in a way that is inspiring even to those of us who are not Palestinians, who are not directly connected to it, but who are trying to understand the story through their stories. So our writer is writing to his friend Mustafa, okay? And their plan was we were going to go to Kuwait, we're going to earn some money, and then get legitimacy to get a visa to go to America. And he's telling his friend Mustafa, he starts the letter saying, I'm not going to come to America. I'm not going to join you. And here's why. And he starts to explain. And part of this, part where I'm about to read is talking about coming back to Gaza and not really understanding what it was that he was searching for. When I went on holiday in June and assembled all my possessions, longing for the sweet departure, the start towards those little things which give life a nice, bright meaning, I found Gaza just as I had known it, closed like the introverted lining of a rusted snail shell, thrown up by the waves on the sticky, sandy shore by the slaughterhouse. This Gaza was more cramped than the mind of a sleeper in the throes of a fearful nightmare, with its narrow streets that had their peculiar smell, the smell of defeat and poverty, its houses with their bulging balconies. This Gaza. But what are the obscure causes that draw a man to his family, his house, his memories, as a spring draws a small flock of mountain goats? I don't know. All I know is that I went to my mother in our house that morning. When I arrived, my late brother's wife met me there and asked me, weeping, if I would do as her wounded daughter Nadia in Gaza hospital wished, and visit her that evening. Do you know Nadia, my brother's beautiful 13-year-old daughter? And obviously foreshadowing here that why would you go visit her in the hospital? Something must have happened. And I'm not going to tell you because I want you to read it. Well, sorry, the part I'm going to read does tell you, but it doesn't tell you the scene, which is devastating. So I'll leave that to you. I went out into the streets of Gaza, streets filled with blinding sunlight. They told me that Nadia had lost her leg when she threw herself on top of her little brothers and sisters to protect them from the bombs and flames that had fastened their claws into the house. Nadia could have saved herself. She could have run away, rescued her leg, but she didn't. Why? No, my friend, I won't come to Sacramento, and I have no regrets. No, and nor will I finish what we began together in childhood. This obscure feeling that you had as you left Gaza, this small feeling must grow into a giant deep within you. It must expand. You must seek it in order to find yourself, here among the ugly debris of defeat. I won't come to you, but you return to us. Come back to learn from Nadia's leg, amputated from the top of the thigh, what life and what existence is worth. Come back, my friend. We are all waiting for you. So, again, as the other books in this series, not an easy read, but a very rewarding read, and something that I would recommend to everybody who wants to know Palestinian side of the story, not necessarily in direct history, but in narrative, talking about what they've experienced, so that you, through reading their experiences, can understand a little bit more about history. And for those of you who've made it this far, I've also put a bit of a treat for those of you who can speak Arabic. There'll be a link in the description below to a recording. As I read this, I again felt inadequate, not knowing Arabic, but I wanted people who did to get a sense of the prose. And so I asked a Moroccan friend if she would read it for me, and she deferred to her dad. So her Moroccan father has read just from the first page of Men in the Sun in Arabic. There's a link to that, and feel free to enjoy it. That's a free link. As always, if you like this review, please hit like, hit subscribe, share this with people who you think could benefit from learning more about Palestinian literature. If you'd like to buy the book, there's a link to buy it in the description below. That's one way to support my work. It doesn't cost you any more, but it does get me a referral fee. You can also support the channel by becoming a member of my Patreon or joining the membership at YouTube. Consider a super thanks for this video. You can send it that way. And just as a reminder, all my videos in 2024, the proceeds, a portion of the proceeds from Patreon here, etc., will go to the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, which provides free medical care to Palestinian children who are injured and ill who could not otherwise get health care locally. As always, enjoy your reading.